At my son's wedding, I walked toward the reception hall expecting nothing more than a quiet seat near the aisle, a place where a mother could watch her child begin a new chapter. Instead, I found a metal trash can placed exactly where my chair should have been. My name card was taped to it as if that were some kind of decoration. I froze, my hand hovering in midair. Guests nearby glanced over, whispered, then laughed softly behind their hands. My daughter-in-law stepped forward with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a joke," she said. "Don't be so dramatic." I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and let me know which city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice travels. The music inside was warm and cheerful, but I stood at the edge of it all, as if the doorway itself had become a border between belonging and being pushed aside. Light from the chandeliers hit the polished floors, turning every reflection into a reminder of where I no longer fit. I kept my posture straight, shoulders steady, refusing to let anyone see the tremor in my hands. After a moment, I slid the name card off the trash can, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my purse. Then I walked toward a far corner of the room, a place no one had bothered to decorate. Laughter drifted from the main table, where my son sat beside his new bride. He didn't look my way, not once. The groom's family clinked glasses, posed for photos, and toasted to love, while I stood apart, trying to swallow the hollow feeling rising in my chest. I had imagined this day differently. I had pictured us sharing a slow dance, or at least a quiet moment before the ceremony. Instead, I watched from a distance, invisible in a room full of people who believed this humiliation was harmless fun. I placed a hand on the back of an empty chair in the corner, letting its steady weight ground me. I wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not today. I had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than any outburst. So I sat alone, smoothing the fabric of my dress, allowing myself a single breath to steady my heart before the rest of the evening unfolded. The corner of the reception hall felt colder than the rest of the room, as if the air itself knew I wasn't meant to take up space there. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, listening to the clatter of silverware and the rise and fall of cheerful voices. Every so often, someone glanced in my direction, then quickly looked away, like they were afraid that acknowledging me might pull them into the discomfort of what had been done. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth draped over the small side table beside me. It was crisp and white, untouched, unlike the ones in the center of the room stained with wine rings and crumbs from shared plates. It felt like a quiet metaphor for my place in this family, clean, distant, unused. I smoothed the fabric with slow movements, letting the rhythm calm the pulse behind my ribs. A waiter approached, carrying a tray of sparkling cider. He hesitated when he saw me sitting alone, uncertain whether I was part of the party at all. "Would you like a glass, ma'am?" he asked softly. I nodded. It wasn't his fault. He set the glass on the table with a quick, respectful smile before hurrying back toward the noise and light. From across the room, I watched my son lean close to his bride as she whispered something in his ear. Her shoulders shook with laughter, and he grinned before kissing her cheek. No tension touched his face, not even a flicker of concern about where his mother was sitting or why. The distance between us felt wider than the decorated hall. It felt measured in years, not feet. I tried to think back to when things had begun to shift. Maybe it was after their engagement, when my daughter-in-law started planning every detail without asking my opinion. Maybe it was years before that, when I first noticed her smile tighten whenever I entered a room. Or maybe it happened in small moments I ignored. A missed holiday invitation, a comment brushed off as humor, a photo where I was conveniently cropped out. The band transitioned into a slow song, the kind meant for mothers and sons. I watched couples step onto the dance floor, moving gently in the warm amber lights. My son didn't look my way. He simply guided his new wife out for the dance, their shadows gliding across the floor where I should have been standing beside him. Someone nearby sighed about how beautiful they looked together. I lifted the glass of cider to my lips, letting the sweetness touch my tongue before setting it down again. The music softened, and for a moment I imagined standing up, walking across the room, tapping my son on the shoulder, but I stayed seated. The image dissolved as quickly as it came. A bridesmaid passed by, adjusting her bouquet. She noticed me and paused just long enough to offer a polite, uneasy smile, the kind a person gives when they witness something uncomfortable but don't want to get involved. "Are you doing okay?" she asked, her voice barely above the melody. "I'm fine," I answered, the words steady and simple. She looked relieved, nodded, and walked away. I rested my hands on my knees, feeling the familiar ache bloom in my chest, not sharp, not dramatic, just a quiet heaviness that spread like a slow-moving tide. I'd come expecting to be part of a family celebration. Instead, I felt like a guest who'd wandered in by accident. But beneath that ache, something steadier was beginning to take shape. A stillness, a clarity. I watched the lights glimmer off the chandelier, reflecting tiny sparks across the room, and for the first time that evening, I wasn't thinking about the humiliation at the entrance. I was thinking about the truth I carried in my purse, the envelope I had tucked away days ago, just in case my instincts proved right. I straightened my back and placed both hands on the table, feeling the cool surface press against my palms. The night wasn't over, and I wasn't done. The music shifted again, livelier this time, pulling more guests toward the center of the room. I stayed in my corner, hands resting around the stem of the untouched glass. The chatter swelled, a tide of voices rising and falling, none of them reaching me. I watched it all as though through a window, present, but not part of anything happening on the other side. Then I saw her. My daughter-in-law's aunt, a woman who had always been polite in a way that felt like she was holding back questions she wasn't allowed to ask. She moved through the crowd with careful steps, her gaze brushing over faces until it settled on me. Something in her expression made my breath still. It wasn't pity, it was worry. She hesitated before approaching, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one watched her walk toward me. When she finally stopped at my table, she pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "You shouldn't be sitting here alone," she said softly. "I'm perfectly fine." She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face. "I saw what they did to your seat," she whispered. "You didn't deserve that." I kept my eyes on the floor, tracing the patterns in the tile. Her voice was low enough that it couldn't travel beyond our corner. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." "No," she continued. "Something I probably should have spoken up about months ago." My fingers tightened slightly around the glass. "Is this about my daughter-in-law?" Her shoulders lifted with a small breath. "It's about the baby." The noise of the wedding faded behind us. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of the air vents and the distant clinking of dishes. She leaned closer. "I've noticed things that didn't add up. The dates, the appointments, the stories she gave the family." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't think your grandson is your son's child." A quiet stillness settled in my chest. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I had already walked too close to this suspicion for too long. "When did you start suspecting?" I asked. "The timing," she said, "and the fact that she was meeting someone at a clinic 2 towns over. A man, not her doctor." She clasped her hands tighter. "I confronted her once. She brushed me off, said I misunderstood what I saw." I let her words hang in the air, giving them the weight they deserved. She lowered her voice even more. "I'm telling you now because, after what they did to you tonight, I realized staying silent only protects the wrong people." I looked up at her then, letting my gaze settle, steady and clear. "Thank you," I said. Nothing more. She nodded, stood, and slipped back into the crowd, disappearing between the clusters of guests. I reached down and touched the side of my purse where the envelope rested. The thin paper shifted under my fingertips, a reminder of the truth I had carried into this room long before the wedding march began. I sat there quietly, the noise of the celebration blurring into a distant hum again. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because my thoughts were sharper now, aligning themselves into something solid. Humiliation was one thing, but lies presented as family were something else entirely. I looked toward the head table where my son and his bride sat beneath strings of white lights. She laughed loudly at something someone said, tilting her head just enough for her earrings to catch the glow. My son leaned in close, unaware of the storm building just steps away. My palm rested on the purse again. Not yet, not in anger, not for revenge, But the moment was coming. The lights dimmed slightly as the staff prepared for the next round of toasts. A soft chime rang from the microphone near the head table, and someone tapped it twice to quiet the room. Guests drifted back to their seats with flushed cheeks and half-finished drinks, settling into the warm glow of the chandeliers. I watched them move as a single wave, all flowing in the same direction, away from me, toward the celebration I was no longer part of. I shifted in my chair, the purse resting against my leg, like a quiet reminder. The envelope inside felt heavier than paper should, its weight steady against my side. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. My mind drifted back to the months before the baby was born, when I'd first sensed something was wrong. It hadn't been dramatic, not at first. Just odd gaps in stories, mismatched timelines, whispers that stopped when I entered a room. My daughter-in-law had avoided me more than usual, brushing off my visits with excuses that didn't fit together. But the moment that stayed with me the most was a memory so small that it had once seemed harmless. It was an afternoon visit, maybe 8 months before the wedding. I had brought over a set of hand-sewn baby blankets, soft, simple ones I'd stitched during long evenings alone. She thanked me with a tight smile, the kind that didn't touch her eyes. She placed the blankets on the back of the couch, but didn't unfold them. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and something changed in her expression, an anxious flicker, a shift she tried to hide. "I need to take this," she'd said, stepping into the hallway. The door hadn't fully closed, and I heard a man's voice on the other end. Not my son's. Not anyone I recognized. A low voice, urgent. And her reply, equally urgent, whispered, "I told you not to call when someone's here." She ended the call quickly when she realized I had heard enough to ask questions, but I didn't confront her. Not then. I simply picked up the baby blankets and folded them again, more out of habit than anything else, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. Silence can keep peace. It can also keep secrets. I hadn't brought it up with my son either. He was already distant, working long hours, blaming stress, missing family dinners without explanation. He wouldn't have heard me even if I'd tried to speak. Back in the present, someone delivered a toast, and the room erupted with laughter. I watched my son raise his glass. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in years. He leaned toward his bride as though she anchored him, as though he trusted her completely. I felt a quiet ache settle under my ribs. Not jealousy, not anger, something colder. A realization that trust, once broken, rarely made a sound when it fell apart. I brushed my fingers along the side of my purse, feeling the smooth edge of the envelope shift beneath the fabric. I remembered sitting in my car outside the clinic the day I decided to get the test done. I had held the envelope in my lap afterward, staring at my handwriting on the front. I didn't open it. Part of me didn't want to confirm what I already suspected, but tonight had changed that. The trash can. The whispers. The laughter. The way she had looked me in the eye and dismissed me like a burden. The truth inside that envelope wasn't just about genetics. It was about respect, about dignity, about a line crossed too many times to ignore. A server approached to refill the water pitchers. He glanced at my empty corner, hesitated, then carefully filled the glass in front of me. His kindness, small as it was, settled into the quiet space in my chest like a steadying hand. I whispered a soft thank you, barely audible over the noise of the crowd. And somewhere in the center of the room, my daughter-in-law lifted her glass, smiling bright under the lights, unaware that the night was shifting beneath her feet. The toasts went on one after another, each person eager to grab the microphone and share a story, some sweet, some rehearsed, all delivered with the same warm glow that never quite reached the corner where I sat. I let the words wash over me without absorbing them, hearing only fragments. Perfect couple, beautiful beginning, family coming together. Family. The word struck me each time someone said it, sharp enough to leave a small bruise. I shifted my attention to the far end of the room, where a cluster of guests lingered near the dessert table. Among them was someone I recognized, a woman who had known my son since preschool. Her name was Maggie, a childhood friend who had remained close to him until marriage slowly pushed old relationships into the background. She spotted me before I could look away. Her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with concern. She approached without hesitation, weaving through guests until she reached my small island of quiet. "You're sitting all the way over here?" she asked gently. I gave a small nod. "Just needed some space." She glanced behind her as if making sure no one was listening, then pulled up the chair beside me. "I'm sorry," she said in a low voice. "What they did at the entrance, that wasn't right." "It's done," I replied. My voice was steady. I wasn't interested in sympathy, only clarity. Maggie folded her hands on the table, her gaze steady on mine. "I came because, well, I think there's something you should know." A familiar sentence. The second time someone had said it tonight. I waited. She leaned in, lowering her voice to almost a whisper. "About the baby." My fingers rested lightly against my purse. "What about him?" "I work at the pediatric clinic down on Oak Street," she said. "I've seen your daughter-in-law there, not with your son." I didn't blink. "With whom?" "A man I've never seen before. Not family. Not someone from your son's circle." She paused. They weren't acting like acquaintances. The air in my corner felt heavier, but not suffocating. Just confirming. Confirming what I had already expected long before tonight. Maggie continued. "The first time I saw them, she seemed nervous. The second time, angry. They were arguing in the parking lot. She didn't notice me, but I heard enough to know it wasn't about a routine visit." I looked at her, the steady calm in my chest unfazed. "Why tell me now?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "Because I thought your son already knew. But watching him tonight," she glanced toward the head table. "He's completely in the dark. And I can't pretend anymore, not after seeing how they're treating you." Her honesty settled between us like a folded cloth, quiet, clean, unmistakable. "I appreciate your courage," I said. She shook her head. "I should have spoken sooner." Then she reached out and placed her hand briefly over mine. "Whatever happens next, you don't have to face it alone tonight." Her gesture was kind, but I didn't need comfort. The truth was no longer a shadow moving behind me. It was a shape, defined and steady. "Thank you, Maggie," I said, lifting her hand gently away. "You've done enough by coming over." She nodded, stood, and returned to the crowd. I sat still, the envelope in my purse pressing lightly against my leg. 2 different people had come to me tonight. 2 people with no connection to each other, both bringing pieces of the same truth. The music swelled again, joyful and bright. Laughter rippled through the room. My son threw his head back, carefree. My daughter-in-law glowed beneath the lights, pulling attention toward herself like a magnet. I rested my palm flat on the purse. I didn't need to open the envelope to know it was time. The band started a new song, upbeat and glittering, the kind meant to keep the celebration alive. Guests clapped along, some already tipsy, some swaying with dessert plates in hand. The whole room pulsed with energy, warm and full, yet somehow colder at the edges where I sat. I shifted slightly, letting the purse rest more firmly against my side. The envelope inside no longer felt like a question. It felt like a door waiting to be opened. A group of cousins drifted toward my corner, laughing loudly as they passed. One of them glanced at me, then whispered something to the others. Their laughter softened, awkward and quick, before they moved on. I didn't take it personally. People avoid what makes them uncomfortable, and tonight, my presence seemed to make many of them uneasy. I kept my eyes on the head table. My son was talking to the best man, nodding along to a story, his smile wide and unguarded. He looked so much like his father in moments like that. Warm, trusting, earnest. I wondered how much of that trust had been misplaced. A memory surfaced, quiet and unexpected. It was from years ago when he was just a little boy. He'd fallen off his bike and skinned his knee badly. He tried to hide the injury, afraid I'd be upset. But when I found him sitting on the porch, wiping at his tears with dusty hands, I had simply lifted him into my lap. He said, "I didn't want you to worry." And I told him, "The truth never hurts as much as a lie." He remembered that lesson then. I wondered if he remembered it now. Someone tapped the microphone again, announcing the next tradition, a slideshow of the couple's journey. The lights dimmed and the room quieted to a soft hush. I watched the screen flicker to life, showing photo after photo of trips, milestones, staged smiles, and moments carefully curated to look perfect. But I didn't see perfection. I saw gaps, missing pieces, months where the timelines didn't align. A photo of my grandson appeared, tiny, wrapped in a hospital blanket. My daughter-in-law beamed at the camera, but her eyes were fixed on someone standing just outside the frame. My son wasn't there. He had arrived later. She'd told us he'd been stuck in traffic. The explanation had seemed plausible at the time. I sat very still, letting the slideshow wash across the room. Every cheerful image felt like another thread tugging at the unraveling seam of the story she'd tried to stitch together. When the lights brightened again, people clapped, wiping sentimental tears. My son kissed his bride's cheek, proud and blissfully unaware. I rose slowly from my chair. My knees stiffened from sitting too long, but the motion steadied something inside me. The room was still noisy, but a few heads turned as I stood, perhaps surprised that I hadn't simply folded myself into the corner forever. I didn't walk toward the head table just yet. Instead, I took a few steps closer to the center of the room, enough for the light to catch my shoulders, enough for my presence to become visible again. I rested one hand on the back of a nearby chair, grounding myself. My purse hung at my side, brushing softly against my hip. I waited. I didn't rush. A decision like this shouldn't be made in anger. The DJ announced the bouquet toss, and the room erupted again. Guests flocked to the dance floor, pushing closer, laughing. My daughter-in-law stepped forward, lifting the bouquet dramatically, as if every spotlight in the room belonged to her. She shone brightly, too brightly, a brightness built on layers of concealment. I looked at her, really looked, and something inside me settled with quiet certainty. This wasn't a moment for revenge, it was a moment for truth, and truth once spoken does not ask for permission. The bouquet toss ended in a burst of laughter as a cluster of bridesmaids tumbled into each other. The bouquet landed in the arms of a cousin who squealed loudly, drawing more cheers from the crowd. My daughter-in-law wiped a playful tear from her eye, basking in the attention, glowing as if she owned every light in the room. I stood still, letting the noise settle around me like dust. No one noticed the way I held the back of the chair, anchoring myself. No one noticed the purse at my side. They were too busy celebrating, too busy pretending everything in that room was perfect. When the commotion softened, the DJ called for everyone to return to their seats for the final round of speeches. Chairs scraped the floor, glasses clinked, and the chatter resumed. I took a step forward, not toward the head table, but toward visibility. The space around me shifted as people drifted past, some glancing my way with polite smiles that didn't linger long. My son caught sight of me for the first time in what felt like hours. His face brightened for a second. Reflex, nothing deeper, and he lifted a hand in a greeting that barely reached his shoulder. It was quick, almost embarrassed, as if acknowledging me too fully might disrupt the image they had crafted for the night. I nodded in return, slow, controlled. Then I watched him turn back to his wife. She looped her arm through his and whispered something that made him laugh again, leaning in close. Her nails, perfectly painted, rested on his sleeve like she owned every part of him. The best man approached the microphone, clearing his throat dramatically. Guests quieted. A few phones rose into the air to record. The room buzzed with anticipation for another sentimental speech. I wasn't listening to his words. I listened to the way my purse gently tapped against my hip when I breathed. Steady, certain, waiting. He wrapped up with a joke, and the room erupted with applause. My daughter-in-law giggled, then stood to take the microphone next. Her dress shimmered under the lights, each sequin catching and reflecting attention. She looked out at the crowd, smiling wide, holding the mic like she was born for it. I just want to thank everyone for being here. Her voice floated strong and confident across the hall. She talked about love, about beginnings, about family, using the word as easily as someone tossing confetti, unaware of the weight it carried for those who understood it more deeply. I took another step forward, then another. Closer now. Close enough that the light from the chandeliers spilled over my shoulders instead of hiding me in a corner. No one noticed yet. They would, but not before I was ready. My daughter-in-law continued speaking, her tone bright and practiced. And of course, she said, we just want to thank everyone who's been such a big part of our journey. She glanced toward her bridesmaids, then her family, then the guests who traveled miles to attend. Her gaze slid past me as if I were part of the backdrop. I didn't flinch. I simply shifted the purse strap across my shoulder, bringing the envelope within easy reach. My fingers brushed the edge of it, feeling the crease I had made days earlier when I folded it shut. A click echoed from the speakers as she passed the microphone to my son. He stepped forward, clearing his throat, adjusting his tie. He was about to speak about gratitude, about love, about a future he believed was secure. And I knew the next word spoken in this room would change that future forever. I let my hand rest on the purse. Just rest. Not yet. But close. So very close. My son adjusted the microphone, tapping it lightly as the room quieted again. The chatter faded into a hush, and everyone turned their attention toward him. The lights above the head table brightened just enough to cast a warm glow over his face. He looked confident, proud, ready to deliver the kind of speech people would replay in their minds years later. I took another quiet step forward. Still unnoticed, still steady. He cleared his throat and began, "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means the world to us." The crowd murmured in agreement. Glasses clinked softly. Someone whispered, "He's such a good speaker." But I wasn't listening to the compliments. I was listening to the tremor in my own breathing. Not fear, no. Something sharper. Something resolved. He continued talking, touching briefly on childhood memories and funny stories from college, the kind of anecdotes that made people laugh politely. His bride smiled at him, leaning her head on his shoulder, as if they were the picture-perfect couple everyone believed them to be. I watched her closely. The way her smile tightened whenever his words drifted too close to sincerity. The way she tugged at the bracelet on her wrist, distracted. The way her eyes darted to the crowd, checking, calculating, measuring reactions. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't glowing the way a new bride should. She was watching for something. Watching for me. I could tell. Her gaze finally reached mine, and for the first time that night, she actually saw me, standing in the open, no longer tucked away in the shadowed corner. Her smile froze, barely noticeable to anyone else, but unmistakable to me. A small hitch in her breath, a twitch of her fingers. She knew the night wasn't secure anymore. My son continued his speech, unaware of the silent exchange happening inches behind him. "And of course," he said, turning slightly toward his bride, "I want to thank my wife for being my partner, my support." Her eyes flicked from me to his hand on the microphone, then back to me. A quick, sharp warning glint. I didn't move. She straightened her posture, placing her hand over his as if grounding him, no, controlling him. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said sweetly, loud enough for the room to hear. But the sweetness didn't reach her eyes. My hand drifted to the purse again, Esna's fingers brushing the envelope's edge. I stayed still, letting her discomfort grow, letting the tension spread quietly across her face like a thin crack in glass. Guests began to notice her change in expression. Small glances, confused frowns, not toward me yet, just toward her. My son glanced at her too, confused. "Are you okay?" he whispered into the mic, the sound traveling farther than he realized. A few guests chuckled softly. She nodded too quickly. "Just emotional," she replied, but her eyes never left me now. The room didn't know what was happening, not yet. But they felt something, a shift, a tightening, the kind of pressure that settles right before a storm breaks. My son tried to continue, but his words stumbled. As I was saying, he looked at his wife again, then at the quiet around him, then finally, his gaze followed hers. Straight to me. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, maybe guilt for not noticing me earlier, maybe confusion about why I was standing there, maybe both. I stepped forward one more time, the envelope resting in my palm now, not raised, not displayed, just present, visible enough, clear enough. My daughter-in-law swallowed hard, her smile collapsing at the edges. The room fell completely silent. The silence stretched across the room like a tight string, thin and trembling. My son held the microphone loosely now, his speech forgotten, his attention fixed on me. Guests shifted in their seats, turning their heads, whispering without sound. Even the music, faint in the background, felt like it was waiting. I didn't rush. I let the quiet settle. Let them feel it. Let her feel it. My daughter-in-law's gaze clung to the envelope in my hand. Her breathing quickened, barely noticeable, but enough for anyone watching closely. She smoothed her dress with trembling fingers, forcing a smile that grew weaker by the second. I took one more step forward, the envelope resting against my palm like a steady heartbeat. "I won't take much of your time," I said softly. My voice didn't need volume. The room was already listening. But since we're celebrating family tonight, a murmur rippled through the guests. My son frowned slightly, confusion knitting across his forehead. "Mom?" he asked, voice low, cautious. I offered him the smallest, calmest smile. "There's something I need to return, something that doesn't belong to me." My daughter-in-law stiffened. "Maybe this isn't the right moment," she said quickly, stepping forward just a little, her tone sweetened with panic. "But it is," someone whispered from a nearby table. They didn't mean to be heard, but the microphone caught it anyway, and a few heads nodded unconsciously. Even they could sense the shape of what was coming. I lifted the envelope, not high, not theatrically, just enough. "I had this tested weeks ago," I said. "DNA." A gasp broke somewhere in the back, another near the front. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. My son's face drained of color. "DNA? Mom, what are you talking about?" My daughter-in-law stepped closer to him, grabbing his arm. "She's confused," she said quickly, too quickly. "She's misunderstanding something. Please, let's not ruin." I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. "I had questions," I continued quietly. "Not accusations, just questions. I wanted clarity, and I didn't want to burden anyone with them." A strange, thick silence filled the room again, this time laced with shock, curiosity, dread. Guests leaned forward, breaths held, waiting for the world to tilt. My son set the microphone down slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might make things worse. "Mom, what's in the envelope?" I met his eyes, steady, calm, the way I used to look at him as a child when he tried to hide scraped knees. "Answers," I said. "Answers about the child you believe is yours." He staggered a step back, the words hitting him harder than any scream could. My daughter-in-law's mask cracked just for a moment, and the fear underneath flashed like a spark. She reached for the envelope, desperate, but I pulled it slightly away, not aggressively, just firmly. "I didn't open it," I said. "I didn't need to. The truth was already loud." A collective breath pulled through the room. My daughter-in-law shook her head, her voice breaking. "She's lying. She's trying to embarrass me. She's making this up." I finally turned to her, my voice steady as stone. "If I were lying, why does this scare you?" Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. My son stared at her, really stared, seeing something in her he'd never seen before. A crack in the picture he had been so eager to believe. I placed the envelope gently on the table beside him. "You deserve to know," I said softly. "Whatever is inside, that truth belongs to you now." Then I stepped back, letting silence finish the sentence I didn't need to speak. My son stared at the envelope like it might burn him if he touched it. His hand trembled as it hovered above the table, inches from the truth he never asked for, but suddenly couldn't avoid. The room had fallen into a hush so complete that I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling lights, the faint clink of ice melting in someone's glass, the uneven breath of the woman standing beside him. My daughter-in-law's fingers dug into his arm. "You don't need to open that." She whispered sharply, her voice too tight, too brittle. "Not here. Not tonight." But her urgency only drew every eye in the room. My son finally looked at her, confusion turning into suspicion. "Why are you so scared?" he asked quietly, not accusing, just bewildered. She laughed, too loud for the silence, too forced for the moment. "Scared? I'm not scared. I'm angry. She's trying to ruin our wedding. This is cruelty." Whispers spread across the tables. Someone murmured, "If it was nothing, she wouldn't react like that." Another added, "Why not just let him see?" My son swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He lifted the envelope with a careful hand, almost reverent. He didn't open it. He simply stared at his name scrawled on the front in my handwriting. "You said you didn't open it," he said to me. "I didn't," I replied. "The truth doesn't need my eyes to exist." The words settled between us, heavy and steady. My daughter-in-law lunged for the envelope, panic breaking through her composure. But my son stepped back, holding it out of her reach. "What is going on?" he demanded now, his voice unsteady with fear and dawning realization. She froze, her face pale under the warm lights. "You? You're going to believe her over me?" He shook his head slowly. "I just need to know what's in here." Guests leaned closer, not daring to blink. The weight of the moment pulled everyone into its gravity. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "But I can't pretend I don't see what's right in front of me." His wife took a shaky step backward, eyes darting wildly as if searching for an escape route. You're going to ruin everything, she hissed. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a mixture of pain and clarity. Or maybe everything was already ruined. A woman at the nearest table gasped. Someone else covered their mouth. Even the band, sensing the shift, lowered their instruments. My son unfolded the flap slowly, the paper cracking faintly in the silence. But he didn't pull the results out. He just held the open envelope, staring into it like he was staring into the edge of truth and betrayal at once. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just breathed, a long, unsteady breath that felt like something inside him was collapsing. His wife reached for him again, but he stepped away, the envelope still in his hand. You told me he came early, he said softly. You told me the doctor confirmed the dates. You told me. His voice broke. You told me so many things. She shook her head, tears building now. You don't understand. I had reasons. A bitter laugh escaped a guest in the back. Someone else muttered, Reasons? At your own wedding? My son looked around the room, face pale, breath uneven. Everyone here deserves honesty, he said finally, voice low. And so do I. His wife's expression twisted, a flicker of anger flashing through the panic. You're making a mistake. He closed the envelope carefully, like sealing the moment itself. The mistake, he said quietly, was believing I didn't need proof. Her face drained of color. She knew. Everyone knew. And for the first time that night, the truth hung heavier than any celebration in the room. My daughter-in-law's face went rigid, the panic shifting into something sharper, cornered anger, desperate and wild. She took a step toward my son, then another, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried through the stunned quiet of the room. If you open that, you'll destroy this family, she said. You'll embarrass yourself. You'll embarrass me. Think about the baby. The baby. That word had been her shield for months. Tonight, it only echoed the truth she'd spent so long burying. My son didn't move. The envelope hung at his side, his knuckles white around it, the air around him trembling with the weight of 1,000 questions. He looked like someone trying to breathe underwater. Tell me, he said, voice small, raw. Is he mine? Her jaw clenched. She blinked rapidly as if buying time. You know I love you, she said. You know we're meant to be. This is our wedding night, for heaven's sake. Don't do this now. Don't listen to her. She jerked her head toward me like I was a stranger who had wandered in from the street. But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. Eyes that once admired her dress now watched her like they were waiting for the mask to fall completely. Some guests crossed their arms. Others sat still, breath held. A few shook their heads slowly, disbelief settling in. My son took a step back. You didn't answer my question. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then anger burst through the cracks. If you cared about this family, you'd ignore whatever she's trying to pull. She never liked me. She's always. That's enough, he said quietly. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like a clean blade. Her mouth snapped shut. He lifted the envelope slightly, and for a moment it felt like the entire room leaned forward. Even the lights seemed to hum. I'm going to read this, he said. Not because I want to, but because I can't live with this doubt. Her breath hitched. Why are you choosing her over me? I'm choosing the truth, he replied. It was the simplest answer, and the one that broke her. She let out a shaky, bitter laugh. Fine, go ahead, but after everything I've done for you, after carrying that baby, a voice from the back interrupted sharply. You sure it was his to carry? A few guests gasped. Someone put a hand over their mouth. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for the source. No one asked you, she snapped at the crowd, but the room wasn't hers anymore. My son turned toward her again, his face drained but calm in a way that frightened even me. I want honesty, he said. One time, just once. Her lips trembled. A tear slipped down her cheek, not gentle, not sorrowful, just the tear of someone whose last defense had cracked. I made a mistake, she whispered. It meant nothing. He meant nothing. The room froze. Even the guests who wanted to soften suddenly couldn't. Her words were too bare, too revealing, too late. My son closed his eyes as if steadying himself. When he opened them again, something had changed. Something had cleared. You lied to me, he said. Not loud, not accusatory, just the truth laid bare. She reached for him again, but he stepped back, this time decisively. The envelope was still in his hand, but it no longer needed to be opened to expose what everyone now saw clearly. And in that pause, Long, heavy, undeniable, her entire facade crumbled. Guests lowered their eyes. Some shook their heads. Some whispered prayers under their breath. She stood alone, trembling in the middle of her own celebration. And for the first time all night, the humiliation wasn't mine. My son didn't speak again. He didn't have to. The truth had already filled the room, heavy and unmistakable, settling over every guest like a quiet verdict. My daughter-in-law stood frozen in place, her mascara smudging, her breath shaking, her carefully constructed image collapsing inch by inch. No one moved to comfort her. No one rushed to defend her. The silence around her said everything. My son finally lowered the envelope, his shoulders sinking as though he'd been carrying far more than he ever realized. He placed it gently on the table, next to the untouched champagne flutes. His wedding ring glinted under the lights as he let his hand rest on the wood for a moment, steadying himself, grounding himself. Then he looked at me, not with blame, not with anger, just heartbreak, softened by something that looked like understanding. "Mom," he whispered. I stepped forward, slow and calm, the way I had approached him countless times as a child, after scraped knees and tearful confessions. When I reached him, I placed a hand on his arm, not to pull him, not to guide him, simply to let him know I was there. He leaned into the touch for just a moment long enough to tell me he wasn't alone. My daughter-in-law wiped her face harshly, realizing she no longer held anyone's attention except as the center of a truth she had tried desperately to bury. She attempted one last plea, her voice cracking. "We can fix this," she said to him. "We can talk, just you and me, please." He shook his head once, not cruelly, just decisively. "Not tonight," he said. "Not anymore." Her shoulders sagged. She looked around for anyone to back her up. But the room had already turned away. A few guests murmured apologies to me as I passed. Others offered quiet nods of acknowledgement, the kind given to someone who had endured more than they ever should have. I didn't linger in the spotlight she once claimed. I didn't need to. Instead, I stepped back, allowing my son space as he walked away from the head table, from the microphone, from the life he thought he was entering with certainty. He didn't storm off. He didn't shout. He simply moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally seen the whole picture. He reached the doorway and paused, glancing over his shoulder at me, not for permission, not for reassurance, but with the silent question of whether I would follow. I did. Not because he needed rescuing, but because he needed not to walk out alone. The crowd parted as we made our way to the exit. No one tried to stop us. No one tried to fill the silence. When we stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around us, soft and steady. The music from the hall faded behind the doors, muffled and distant, as if it belonged to another world entirely. My son took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me, for not letting me stay blind." I nodded, placing a gentle hand on his back. "Truth doesn't destroy families," I said quietly. "Lies do." He closed his eyes, letting those words settle. For a long moment, we simply stood in the stillness, the night open wide before us, the path ahead unclear, but at least honest. A few guests trickled out behind us, offering small gestures of support. Soft pats on his shoulder, brief looks of sympathy, respectful nods toward me. Then slowly, my son straightened. His posture changed. Not broken, not defeated, but steadier. Stronger. The kind of strength that comes from facing the truth rather than hiding from it. He turned to me, his voice steadier than before. "Let's go home, Mom." I nodded. We walked together toward the parking lot, leaving behind the glittering hall, the discarded bouquet, the lies, the humiliation. And as the doors closed behind us, I felt something shift inside. Not triumph, not victory, but peace. A quiet, steady peace that comes when you refuse to be anyone's silent shadow ever again.